Join our students to the homework help video, page 296. Let's go ahead and get started. The directions say, decide whether the statement is true or false. Then write the converse and decide whether it is true or false. So here we go. If a quadrilateral is a rectangle, then it is a parallelogram. Okay, that is true. If you have a rectangle, then it is a parallelogram. Okay, now turn that around. If you have a parallelogram, then it's a rectangle. That is false. If you have a parallelogram, then it's a rectangle. That's false. I can do that right now. There's a parallelogram. And it's not a rectangle. Okay. Alright, number 2. If a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then it is a rhombus. No, that is false. I can draw a parallelogram that is not a rhombus. There we go. Pretty simple to do. Now turn that around. If a quadrilateral is a rhombus, then it's a parallelogram. That's true. Okay, that is definitely true. If I have a rhombus, then I definitely have a parallelogram. Okay, number 3. In fact, the definition of a rhombus is a parallelogram. Okay, number 3. If a quadrilateral is a square, then it is a rhombus. That is true. If you have a square, it is also a rhombus. That is true. Now the converse. If I have a rhombus, then it's a square. That is false. Just because you have a rhombus like this does not mean it's a square. That is false. Okay, moving on to number 4. If a quadrilateral is a square, then it's a parallelogram. That's true. If you have a square, it is definitely a parallelogram. Okay, but if I have a parallelogram, then it's a square. No, that's not true. Here's a parallelogram right here, and then it's definitely not a square. Okay. All right, let me get a drink here real quick. Okay, number 5. If a parallelogram is a rectangle, then it's a rhombus. that is definitely not true. I mean, it might be. I mean, sometimes some of these are true, sometimes they're not. But if I have a rectangle, there's a rectangle. It's not a rhombus. Okay. Now, if I have a square, that's a rectangle. It is a rhombus. Okay, but just because you have a rectangle does not mean it's a rhombus. Now, if I have a rhombus, then I have a rectangle. Okay, if I have a rhombus, then I have a rectangle. No, it's not true. Not at all. Here's a rhombus, and it's not a rectangle. Okay, number 6. If a rhombus is a square, then it's a rectangle. Okay, this is tricky here. Let's think this through. If a rhombus is a square, so here's my rhombus. It's a square. Then it's a rectangle. That's true. Yes, because every square is a rectangle. Okay. If I have a rectangle, then I have a rhombus. That's a square. Wait a second. This is confusing. If I have a rectangle, that is a rhombus. Okay. If I have a rectangle, then I have a rhombus. That's a square, and that's not true. Now the book is saying true. So I guess it depends. I guess it all depends on how you write your converse. I mean, I would write my converse like this. If I have a rectangle, then it is a rhombus. That is a square. And that's not true. Just because I have a rectangle does not mean I have a rhombus. That's a square. Now, if they want you to write it like this, if I have a rhombus that's a rectangle, then it's a square. Now that's true, because here's your rhombus. All 4 sides are congruent. That is also a rectangle, because I have 4 right angles. Then it's also a square. That would be true. So I'm not going to really worry about this one. It all depends on how you write your converse, okay? Alright, moving on to number 7. 7 through 12. Here we go. Okay, the directions say to name which quadrilaterals have the property. Okay, all sides are congruent. Well, that would be a rhombus and a square. C and D. Okay, number 8's down here. I'll kind of check these off as we do them, okay? Alright, number 8. All the angles are congruent. All 4 angles. Well, guys, a parallelogram does not have 4 congruent angles. A rhombus does not necessarily have 4 congruent angles. A rectangle and a square always have all 90 50-degree angles, so all their angles are congruent. So B and D. Okay, moving on. Oh, sorry about that. That was a lucky coincidence. Here we go, down here. B and D. Okay, alright, cross off number 8, number 9. The diagonals are congruent. Well, that's only going to be a rectangle or a square. So B or D. Okay, number 10. Opposite angles are congruent. Well, guys, that's everything up here. Because remember, guys, look, listen to me. A parallelogram, when you have a parallelogram, opposite angles are congruent, right? We know that. When you have a parallelogram, opposite angles are congruent. A rectangle is a what? Parallelogram. A rhombus is what? A parallelogram. A square is what? A parallelogram. So all 4 of these have opposite angles congruent. So A, B, C, and D. Okay, number 11. It is equiangular and equilateral. That would be a square, because a square and a rhombus are both equilateral. They have 4 congruent sides. However, a rhombus does not necessarily have 4 congruent angles. A rhombus could look like this. And that's definitely not 4 congruent angles, but a square has 4 congruent angles, so it has to be a square. Letter D. And then number 12, the diagonals are perpendicular. Well, the only one we know about that would be a rhombus and squares. A rhombus and a square have diagonals that are perpendicular, so C and D. C and D. Okay, moving on to numbers 13 through 16. Each figure is a parallelogram. So students, did you hear that? We know we have a parallelogram, okay? Identify the type, and explain your reasoning. So, we know we have parallelograms, so now think this through, guys. If we know that we have a parallelogram, then opposite sides are congruent. So this side here would get 1 mark over here. If this side has 1 mark, then this side gets 1 mark, because we have a parallelogram. Also in a parallelogram, opposite angles are congruent. So if this is 90 here, this is 90 over here. Also in a parallelogram, consecutive angles are supplementary. So if this is 90 here, this has to be 90 here. And then diagonal opposite angles are congruent. This has to be 90. Students, what do we have here? We have a square. Okay? Alright, moving on. This is a parallelogram. If we have a parallelogram, then we know that opposite angles are congruent. So this angle over here has to be 90. And then we know that consecutive angles are supplementary. So this angle here has to be 90, because we have a parallelogram. And then when you have a parallelogram, opposite angles are congruent. So we know this angle over here has to be 90. So what do we have, guys? A rectangle. We might have a square. We don't know for sure, but we definitely have a rectangle. Okay, moving on to number 15. Okay, now we have a parallelogram, okay? We know that for sure. So we know for sure that well, here it is. We learned that when diagonals, when you have a parallelogram and the diagonals are perpendicular, then you have a rhombus. So what do we have here? A rhombus. Okay. And then lastly, notice here on number 16, we have a parallelogram, we know that. But we also notice that this segment here is congruent to this segment here. So we'll call it 8 and a length of 8. But hold it, this is a length of 8 also. And this is a length of 8 also. So look what you have. You have congruent diagonals. You have congruent diagonals. So we have a rectangle. Remember, that's one of the ways to prove that you have a rectangle, is when you have congruent diagonals. Okay? Congruent diagonals. Okay, moving on to number 17 through 20. The directions say HIJK is a square. So here it is. Here's your square. HIJK. Alright, there's your square. With diagonals intersecting at L. So here's my diagonals. Right there. and they intersect at L. Okay. Now HI is 2, so we have a length of 2 here, and HL is square root of 2 right here. The segment right here is square root of 2. Complete the statements, okay? IK would be how long? When our students come on, think about this. We have a square, okay? And one of the things we know about squares, a square is also a rectangle, okay? So when I have a square, I also have a rhombus, but I also have a rectangle. So what do we know about rectangles? We know their diagonals are congruent. So if this is square root of 2 here, then that means, no, listen to me carefully, guys. Remember, okay, I'm going to go really slow here. This is a parallelogram, okay? Because a square is a parallelogram. So we know the diagonals bisect each other. So if this is square root of 2 here, this is square root of 2 over here. We know that. That's one of the characteristics of a parallelogram. Now, a square has congruent diagonals. That means this line here is the same length as this line here, okay? So that means this here has to be square root of 2, and this here has to be square root of 2. So they want to know the whole length of IK. The whole length of IK. Well, guys, we have square root of 2 here, square root of 2 here. So we have square root of 2 plus square root of 2. That would be 2 square root of 2, because there's a 1 right here in front of the square root, even though you can't see it, and there's a 1 right here. When you add square roots, you leave the square root alone, and you add the outside numbers. So square root of 2 plus square root of 2 is 2 square root of 2. Okay, alright, number 18. Find the measure of KLJ. KLJ, right here. Right here, this angle here. Now, students, think about it. We know we have a square. I'm going to write this down. We know we have a square. So what else do we know that we have? A parallelogram. What else do we know that we have? A rectangle. What else do we know that we have? A rhombus. Because a square is all of those things. So this is a square, but it's also a rhombus. What do we know about rhombuses or rhombi? We know their diagonals intersect at 90 degrees. They're perpendicular. So these diagonals are perpendicular. So this angle right here is 90 degrees. Okay, number 19. Find the measure of IJH. IJH. Now, guys, think about this. Come on. We know this angle here is a right angle because we have a square. Okay, but we also have a rhombus because a square is a rhombus. And what do we know about rhombi? We know that the diagonals bisect the angles. Okay, that means this angle here is cut in half. So this little angle here is 45 degrees, and this little angle here is 45 degrees. Remember, we learned that in the video. Okay, the diagonals of a rhombus bisect the angles. So the measure of IJH, I down to J and up to H, this angle here would be 45 degrees. Okay. Alright, moving on to 20. Find the perimeter of triangle IJK. IJK. Okay, here we go, students. Watch this very carefully, okay? Here's the triangle I'm going to find the perimeter of. IJK is in green. Okay? Now remember, we're dealing with a square, which means all four sides are congruent. So if this length up here is 2, then that means this length here is 2, and this length here is 2. Now I've got this length here, and this length here. So the perimeter means to add up all these sides, okay? So here's what I have. I have 2 plus 2, 2 plus 2 plus square root of 2 plus square root of 2. So now all that you have to do is add your like terms. Here's 2 constant terms. 2 plus 2 is 4. Here's 2 radical terms. Square root of 2 plus square root of 2. Remember, there's a 1 here and a 1 here. So you would get 2 square root of 2. There's your answer. Okay, moving on to number 21 through 24. BDEG is a rectangle. Okay, so this is a rectangle right here, which means it's also a parallelogram. Okay, and ABCD is a rhombus. ABCD measure of angle DAB. DAB. So from here to here to here, this angle here. Okay, students, so here we go. Please pay really close attention, please. Now we know we have a rectangle, so we know this angle here is 90 degrees, okay? So if this is 63, then this here has to be what? 27, okay? That gives you 90, 27 plus 63. Now, here's your rhombus right here. Here's your rhombus that comes down to here and over to here. What do we know about the diagonals of a rhombus? The diagonals bisect the angle. So if this little angle here is 27, then this little angle here is also 27. So that whole angle right there is 54 degrees. Now remember, students, a rhombus is a parallelogram, right? Sure it is. A rhombus is a parallelogram. So here's your rhombus, which is also a parallelogram, okay? And remember, in a parallelogram, consecutive angles, that means angles that are side by side, are supplementary. They have to add up to 180. So that's why the answer is 126, because this angle here has to be 126, because 126 plus 54 is 180. Okay, let's leave those numbers up there for now. Okay, we're going to find the angle of BCG. So B to C to G. So this angle right here and over to here, right here. Okay, students, here's what we're going to do. Now watch this carefully. Please listen to me. Here's your rhombus. A rhombus is a parallelogram, right? What do we know about parallelograms? Opposite angles are congruent. So if this angle here is 126, then this angle right over here has to be 126. Do you see that okay? Now look, I have a straight line here. A straight line. So this angle here with one dot and this angle here with one dot have to add up to 180, because a straight line is always 180 degrees. So that means this angle here has to be 54, because 126 plus 54 is 180. Okay? Alright, now we're going to find the angle of GCF right here. GCF. I'm going to clear some of this off a little bit. Okay, now what do we have? We had this whole angle here was 54, I believe. And this whole angle here was 126. And this angle here was 54 degrees, okay? Now we're looking for the angle of GCF, this angle right here. So students, the angle I'm trying to solve for is angle GCF, this angle here with a dot. Now can I show you something, guys? Watch this carefully, please. Look, remember, here's my rhombus up here. It's a parallelogram. So that means this angle, if this angle is 126, then this whole angle here is what? 126. But what else do we know about rhombi? These diagonals bisect the angles, they cut them in half. So if this whole angle here is 126, then this little angle here is 63. And this little angle here is 63. Now, Mr. Earhart, how does that help? Well, I'm going to show you. Remember, we learned a long time ago that when two lines intersect, vertical angles are congruent. That means this angle here is congruent to this angle here, and these two angles here, this angle here with two dots is congruent to this angle here with two dots. So look right here. Look at my intersecting lines. I've got a line here and a line here intersecting. That means this angle here is the same as this angle here. So the angle I'm looking for, which is this angle right here, is 63 degrees. So this angle here is 63 degrees. And then lastly, we're looking for the angle of DEG. So that's easy. Wow. 90 DEG, this angle right here. Well, that's 90 degrees because we have a rectangle, and rectangles have four right angles. Okay, moving on to numbers 38, 39, and 40. Here we go. Okay, they want us to, in the directions, find the length or the angle that they're asking you to find. They want us to find the length of XY. Let's go ahead and draw the square. Here's my square. WXYZ. Now remember, real quick, I'm not sure if we'll need this, but just in case we do, if we have a square, then we also have a what? A parallelogram, and we also have what else? A rhombus, and we also have what else? A rectangle. So all of these characteristics work for a square. Okay, Wx is 1 minus 10x. YZ is 14 plus 3x. And they want us to find the length of xy. Now remember, in a square, all of your sides are congruent. So I can take this side here and set it equal to this side here, because the square has 4 congruent sides. So let's solve this quickly. I'm going to bring the 10x over and make it a positive 10x. Okay, now it's gone. I'm going to bring this 14 over and make it a negative 14. And now it's gone. So here's what I have left. 1 minus 14 is a negative 13. 3 plus 10 is 13. Divide both sides by 13. And x equals negative 1. So x equals negative 1. So put a negative 1 right here for x. And we have negative 10 times negative 1 is 10. Negative times negative is positive. Plus 1 is 11. So this length is 11. This length is 11. This length is 11. This length is 11. Hold on, Mr. Earhart. What if I put a negative 1 here? Will I get 11? Yes, you will, definitely. There it is. 14 plus 3 times negative 1. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. And 14 minus 3 is 11. So all 4 sides are 11, so the answer is 11 for this length right here. Okay, number 39, we have a rhombus, okay? A rhombus. And so if we have a rhombus, what else do we have, guys? A rhombus is also a parallelogram. Okay, it might be a square, but we don't know for sure, so we can't say that. Okay, there's my parallelogram. Very poorly drawn parallelogram. A rhombus, WXYZ. Okay, angle x is 24, 10 minus x. Z is 6, x plus 15. Now let's stop right now. Let's solve for x. We can do that, okay? Because in a parallelogram, opposite angles are congruent. So 6 times x plus 15 equals the angle opposite, which would be 24 times 10 minus x. So here we go. Take your 6 and multiply it through. 6x plus 90 equals 240 minus 24x. Now bring your 24x over and make it a positive 24x. That leaves you with 30x. Bring your 90 over, make it a negative 90. That leaves you with positive 150. Divide both sides by 30 and we will get 5. So x equals 5 now. They want us to find the measure of angle y right here. And that's fine. That's not too bad to do. So where this x is right here, 6x plus 15. I'm going to put a 5 in, okay? So right here's an x. I'm going to put a 5. 5 plus 15 is 20. 20 times 6 is 120. So this angle right here, this angle right here is 120 degrees. Okay? 120. Now remember, if we have a rhombus, we also have a what? Parallelogram. And remember, in parallelograms, consecutive angles are supplementary. So this angle here and this angle here, these two angles side by side, have to add up to 180. So if this is 120 right over here, then this has to be 60, which is the angle we're looking for, angle y. So 60 degrees. Okay? Now, let's take a look at the last one, number 40. Okay, we have a rectangle. So remember, if we have a rectangle, we also have a parallelogram. Okay? And that would be it. Now, here's my rectangle. And we have rectangle WXYZ. Okay? Now, the perimeter is 24, okay? Now if we take xy plus yz, we get this. And if we take xz, Oh, I'm sorry. That one is to find the perimeter of triangle XYZ. Okay, so here's the triangle. They want us to find the perimeter of right here. They want us to find the perimeter of this, okay? Well, we already know that if we take, let's see, xy plus yz, we get 5x minus 1. If we take this side here, xy plus this side here, yz, we get this. Okay, we already know that. And here's xz, 13 minus x. So we know this side plus this side is 5x minus 1 plus this third side here is 13 minus x. And we know that has to equal 24 because the perimeter of this green triangle is 24. Let's go ahead and simplify this left side. 5x minus 1x would be 4x. Negative 1 plus 13 would be 12. Okay, next we're going to bring the 12 over and make it a negative 12. So we're left with 4x equals 12. Divide both sides by 4, x equals 3. Okay, now it's not our answer, but we're getting closer. Now watch this carefully, students, and we're done. This is it, watch. What do we know about rectangles? We know their diagonals are congruent. They want us to find the length of WY right here. Well, guys, the length of WY is the exact same length as CX. So let's find the length of CX, okay? And here it is. XC is 13 minus X, right? And what is X? 3. So put a 3 here. 13 minus 3 is 10. So XC is 10. But hold, if XC is 10, then what is WY? It's 10 also. So the measurement of WY is 10. Remember, students, in a rectangle, the diagonals are congruent. Okay? Alright, I hope this homework help video has been help to you. Call or email if you have any questions.